needs no introduction. Dr. Merit Cudkowicz will be our first presenter today. She serves as Chief of the Neurology Department and Director of the Healy Center for ALS at Mass as Julianne Thorne, Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School. Merit will be presenting today on a general overview of ALS trials, what's new, opportunities, and challenges. Thank you, Merit.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Jen, for being an amazing leader and partner. You spoke so well about Kevin, who brought us together and who we remember all the time for his passion for collaboration and speed, and always asked us at the end of a meeting to give one word of what we're feeling like. So I hope today or tomorrow at the end of this meeting, we'll also think about that, and that'll be a very positive word about what we're going to hear in the next 2 days about the state of science. So I'll just say that I can't in 20 minutes give justice to the huge amount of activity that's going on in ALS trials. Having been now in the field almost 3 decades, starting like super young, it's never been as extraordinary as it is right now. Just the number of treatments and trials, number of things under review at the FDA, it really feels like a game-changing moment. And ALS ONE has been really part of that, as well as many of you are on the call. I'm excited to see a lot of international people here, and it's really a global effort to defeat this illness. So I'll touch on where we are on therapies now, where we're kind of going, and some of those opportunities and challenges that we can kind of tackle together. So I'd say where we are is pretty extraordinary, but even though we do have some treatments and options for our patients, it's still an illness that's uniformly progressive, and so there's still a lot more to do. I know everybody here is somehow connected to ALS, so there's no need to go too much into what the illness is, but I just want to highlight a few things. It is a global illness, and it's an illness where it hits people usually in their mid-50s, but it can be in their 20s, it can be in their 90s. The number of people with ALS is thought to be going up as the population is aging, and there's over 500,000 people with ALS globally, and again, those numbers are going up. The progression is relentless, typically a course of 2 to 3 years, but with variability between, some people having it, like you heard Kevin, less than 7 months, and other people having it for more than a decade. The time from the first symptom to diagnosis remains one of our challenges, and is still long in most countries, on average about 12 months, some places 18 months, some 8. And this means there's a delay in knowing what you have, but also a delay in intervening. And so lots of great work happening to try to work in that area and accelerate the diagnosis so we can intervene earlier. The progression is different between people, but will involve the loss of ability to walk, to use the arms, to breathe, speak, and swallow. So it is in neurology really one of the most serious illnesses that we care for. We have had some major advances in the last couple of years, which again is huge. We do now have 3, and I'm very excited about that, 3 FDA approved treatments for ALS to slow progression. These are also available in Canada, and some of them are available in other countries, though in some countries not all of them are available. So there are definitely different regulatory approval process globally, and that is one of our challenges. There's also a 4th drug, Nudexa, that's on the market for a symptom called pseudobulbar affect. So we do have options. So the days of when people will go to the clinic and be told there wasn't anything to do are long gone. They've been gone a long time because we could do care things, but now they're also gone because we have treatment options to offer our patients. You're going to hear a lot about science later today. I'll just say that the reason we have these treatments and we have so many trials going on is because the understanding of the basic biology of ALS has grown tremendously. From the days when maybe there was 10 or 20 people studying it to really thousands of people studying it. And this gives us targets, though it also does point out the complexity of the illness and probably the need, at least in sporadic ALS, for combinations of treatments. In 1995, with Dr. Brown and many others, we started an ALS Trial Consortium. And I wanted to point this out here because one of the huge plus and opportunities in ALS is that there is such a well-organized trial network that is global, with more than 140 centers, a lot of experience in trials. In the mid-90s, we didn't have outcome measures. We didn't have sites all close to patients. We didn't have biorepositories or clinical data sets. That's all there now. And it makes going into the ALS field for a pharma company, lowers the barrier tremendously because we have that efficiency. This network also trains lots of young investigators in how to lead trials, how to be a good site investigator, develops new outcome measures, and has a science advisory board led by Dr. Brown, Dr. Miller, Tim Miller at WashU, and Dr. Jeff Rossi at Hopkins to provide advice to people who might be new to the space about preclinical models as well as trial design options. And we have our annual meeting coming up in Clearwater, November 1st to 3rd, which is really a collaboration between clinicians, scientists, everybody who touches ALS, industry, and people living with ALS. So this group is available to help anyone interested in ALS therapy development. So I mentioned that we have 3 approved drugs. So the first one was riluzole that was approved in 1995. It's an oral drug. It's also available as sublingual now, and it blocks glutamatergic transmission. It does prolong life 2 to 3 months. There have been many studies since it came out on the market that reproduce this finding and also suggest that it might be greater than that if started earlier. The initial studies didn't have very great tools on function, but initially did not show effect on function. Darivone is an antioxidant that was approved initially in the US in 2017, earlier in Japan. It's intravenous. Then it was approved more recently, last June, in the United States as an oral drug with the same schedule and shown to be bioequivalent. This was shown to slow functional decline by about 33%. And the initial study that was 6 months long did not show a survival benefit. So these are 2 options that we have to give our patients now. Now, the Darivone studies were done in Japan, and they were all done on top of riluzole. So this is really an additive effect to riluzole, shown to be safe together as well. So as you know, September 29th, the FDA approved a 3rd option, and that was the Amylyx drug, now known as Relyvrio. We're all practicing how to say that. And this is a combination of taurursodiol and phenylbutyrate. And this drug slows the progression by about 25% and also prolongs survival anywhere between 5 to 10 months, depending on the statistical analysis approach. So again, this is huge news for our patients and huge news for the field. You're going to hear later more details of, I believe, from Amylyx on the study, but I just wanted to highlight a few things that this idea came from Justin Klee and Josh Cohen, who were looking at pathways involved in Alzheimer's and ALS and the ability to perhaps repurpose old drugs. They approached one of our scientists, Dr. Rudy Tanzi, who gave some advice on preclinical studies. And then they came to our NEALS Scientific Advisory Board, who also provided some advice on preclinical studies. And then with Dr. Paganoni, who's here today, how to design a trial to test this in patients with ALS. This was run through our NEALS consortium with the Coordination Center at Mass General and our partners at Barrow for monitoring outcome measures, and was a high quality run study. And this was a partnership really with the entire community. This was, I think, the first time that I saw a whole community coming together to do a well-designed study, but also for advocacy around the possibility of when you have a robust finding of a single study approval in the United States. So just a high point, as I mentioned, there was about a 25% slowing of the loss of function as measured by ALS Functional Rating Scale. And there was on the primary survival analysis using data from the open label extension, which is a really critical new innovation in ALS trial design, showed about a 4.8 months longer survival in people who started the drug 6 months earlier than those who started it after the double-blind placebo control part was finished for the study. So it was based on this study that the FDA approval was given last month. And we are now working all at the centers about to get this for our patients. So where we want to be, obviously we now have 3 drugs that slow progression, and that's fantastic, but we want to slow it even more than that, and we ultimately would like to stop it. And it's really becoming clear already that this is likely going to require a cocktail of treatments, again, for the sporadic form of the illness, until maybe the science tells us maybe some more upstream biology that might allow us to go with fewer drugs or more targeted treatments. But the field is also thinking about how to prevent ALS. And that's just fantastic that that's finally in our language. And this is starting really with gene carriers. And we do have the first prevention trial ongoing for SOD1 ALS. But the field is also thinking about how do we find out what the first change biologically is in people, even before they get symptoms, so that we can start again to intervene earlier and earlier. And the field is also starting to talk about how do we repair function, how do we give back function with investigators coming from spinal cord injury and stroke and other fields that think about repair into the ALS sphere. And I'm very excited that there are now companies that have drugs that are getting very close to going into people that work more on regrowth of axons or removal of inhibition of axonal growth. So you can see that being very important as part of a cocktail approach for ALS. So this list isn't complete. But I did want to, because you can probably put it on one slide, but I wanted to show kind of what's ongoing now that is more in late stage. And there are a ton of other early phase 1 trials going on that aren't on this list. But on the left, you see that we do have actually another drug with positive, I'd say late stage trial data in ALS, and that's high dose methylcobalamin work all done in Japan. First study in the broad population did not show efficacy on the primary outcome, but a post hoc analysis showed a positive effect of about 50% survival in people starting early in the illness. A repeat study was recently published, a 16-week study starting the drug within the first 12 months of symptom onset, and showed about a 43% slowing of the loss of function. And I do not know the regulatory thoughts of ESI on that, but hopefully that's coming forward. You're going to hear later today also about the results of tofersen, a positive phase 3 study that was recently published in New England Journal of Medicine on SOD1 ALS, and also data on NurOwn, a phase 3 trial, which has both evidence on the clinical end as well as biomarker data. Those in red were negative phase 3 trials, and the ones in the middle are ongoing late stage trials. So a lot of activity, and we can see this at the sites where we used to have maybe 1 trial to offer the people that we care for. We now have 4 or 5, sometimes up to 10 trials. So it's a very active space. But I'd say one thing that's really important is we still have more people with ALS who want to be part of the trials than actually opportunities for them. So we still have room for other trials as well. Now, because of this sheer number of companies and academics working in the space, our network did think that it was time to do a platform trial. And you're going to hear the next talk of Dr. Paganoni about the first platform trial to launch and actually start to get results, the Healy ALS platform trial. There's also a platform trial now in the UK and in England, and then one in Europe. So we're seeing these innovations that were so successful in oncology coming to ALS as well. So I just wanted to say one thing about tofersen. I see Dr. Brown here. Dr. Brown and his colleagues found the SOD1 gene in 1993, and I was fortunate to be his fellow in 1994 and took care of a family with SOD1 ALS and saw directly how devastating this illness is, where people often have a survival of less than 12 months with the most common mutation. And Susan up there is the first patient I ever took care of. And I did promise her and her family that I wouldn't give up on this illness until we found the treatment. I'm so excited that we have now under FDA review this antisense oligo against SOD1 tofersen as a possible treatment for people with SOD1 ALS. I'm not going to show the data because you're going to see it later, but from Toby, but I'll add that this trial, phase 3 trial, showed target engagement with lowering of SOD1. It showed a large effect of neurofilament with more than a 50% lowering of that, and it showed an effect of clinical function that started to be shown during the double blind and then was much more obvious during the longer period in the open label extension. And that's kind of a theme that's coming up, that how important it is to offer open label extension options to keep people blinded to their initial assignment and to be rigorous in the data that you collect, because that open label extension can give data, as we saw both in the ALS trial and the tofersen. It's very important for understanding the long-term impact of your drug. The first prevention trial in ALS has started, led by Dr. Michael Benatar at the University of Miami with Biogen on tofersen. And here they're following SOD1 carriers and using that biomarker neurofilament to predict when someone should be randomized into the trial. So this is really paving the way for hopefully many other prevention trials in at least initially the genetic forms of the illness. I want to give one example of a trial that's done separately from a platform trial, and then again, you'll hear next from Sabrina about how we're approaching this in the platform trial. So this is a study that I'm the chair of the steering committee for, run from Sanofi, Dr. Atassi and others. It's called the Himalaya Trial. It's a phase 2 trial of a RIPK1 inhibitor called SAR 443820. It's a phase 2 study, and it's a global study. There's a growing body of data that RIPK1 is elevated in people with ALS, and that an inhibition can preserve motor neurons. It decreases apoptosis and also modulates neuroinflammation. It's an oral tablet. It's in phase 2 testing. There was an extensive phase 1 testing to identify dose, and this has now started and is rolling really globally through Asia, Europe, Canada, and the United States. For the design, it's not that dissimilar to the ALS trial. It has slightly broader criteria on entry, but there is a 24-week or 6-month double-blind period. People are randomized 2-to-1, 261 participants, and then after week 24, people are rolled over into a long-term extension, but are kept blinded to their initial assignment during Part A, and that is up to 1.5 years. And this, again, will give the ability to tell both a shorter-term effect on decline in ALS progression measured by the ALS Functional Range Scale, but also ability to look at survival, other outcome measures, and also the impact of starting early versus later. This also includes some digital speech analysis as an exploratory outcome measure. I think there's room in the field for these single studies where you're not in the platform always, and global studies, but there's also a real need for ways to speed it up, like the platform trial, when you can test multiple drugs, share placebo, share the infrastructure, and get to answers faster. And again, you'll hear from Dr. Paganoni about that. So I just want to end and say that there's huge opportunities. We have much better understanding of the illness, but we have a lot more to do there to develop even better models and better understanding of the complex biology. We have trial and regulatory success, and that's huge in this field. And while I think we're still likely to need often 2 studies, we have shown that for a robust finding, there is a way for single study approval. And I think people here know that I'm passionate about that. I think ALS is just as serious as many cancers that do have single study approvals, and we need to get there and get the tools in there so that we can see more and more drugs that are highly effective in the trials and then lead to faster approvals. We have global collaborations and trial sites really all over the world. And we have a very engaged patient community who knows about trials, who want to be in trials and want to help companies and investigators and how to keep doing this better. And they want to be part of trials. We're really seeing enrollment skyrocketing. And we're seeing lots of innovations in trials, so platform trials, basket trials, gene therapy trials. It's really quite exciting. But we have a lot of work still to do to understand how to diagnose earlier, how to maybe subset people by biology, and to develop better surrogate outcome measures. So more work to do. So I hope I've convinced you that it's an exciting time and that we have a robust pipeline and lots of opportunities. I guess my word of the day will be probably extraordinary. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Merit, for a fantastic overview of what is an exploding area, and thanks for your leadership in the space. I'd like to encourage folks who are on participating today to add questions to the chat. But I have one at the start, if you don't mind. So it's really exciting to see new therapeutic options really come on board. I wonder if you can speak to added complexity to the clinical trial landscape as a function of new treatments being on board. Are those influencing some of the trial designs, power to detect effects, looking for additive effects or antagonistic effects in some cases?
Great question. Yes, I think that now that we have more drugs, the standard of care might be changing. So we might need to amend our power calculations on sample size. We've done some of that work on the platform trial with what the impact of amyloid is coming on. And the good news is that it's not actually a huge number of additional participants you have to add, but there will be a need to increase sample size. There'll be also a need, obviously, to look for drug-drug interactions, ideally kind of preclinically. And I think the biggest challenge to trials is actually drugs coming on the market in the middle of your trial, because obviously we want to allow our patients to be on those new drugs, but it could lead to some imbalances in those trials and some challenge on the statistical analyses. But I think that's, these are good problems to have. We have brilliant biostatisticians who have joined the ALS field and are going to help us kind of figure out how to handle those changes in standard of care.
Thank you for that. Another question that I had on the line of good problems to have, I guess. Trials where primary endpoints and secondary endpoints might not always agree, where you find your primary endpoint is not met, but you see something promising in those secondary endpoints. Do you have thoughts or guidance for companies as they're moving forward dealing with those types of results?
Yeah, I think that is going to happen, especially in kind of, I would say, the phase 2 space, when you might have, again, a smaller sample size, a shorter follow-up period. And I kind of view it as that's really your learning trial, and that might give you guidance on how to move forward in your phase 3, based on that outcome. I think most drugs will not have this discordance, because we know that our outcome measures like ALSFRS and breathing are correlated to survival. But you could see, sometimes where one drug works on one part of the system and not another. So my guess advice would be to spend time in the phase 2 space. There's always a rush to go big, and but knowing the dose and knowing the effect of your drug early can really help guarantee more success in the phase 3.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat. I imagine this is a question that a lot of people think about, and so we'll throw it to you. What would you say is among the most important targets to address in sporadic ALS? Is that something that you've considered?
Yes, so we have much smarter people on the line than me on this, but obviously, TDP-43 is a really important target. It's kind of what's in front of us, and you don't want to just look at that. But I don't think we've yet tested, a drug that can work on that biology yet, and so that has to be done. Then, the exciting thing is there's getting knowledge on what might be before the problem with TDP-43, whether that's abnormalities in nuclear pore transport. I think the more upstream we can get, the better we're going to be for success. But those are two to mention.
Well, thank you very much. I think at this point, we will want to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Merit.
Thank you.